This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business, coming to you from the Kenyan capital where it's 9 p.m. I am Peninah Karibe, and as always we begin with a look at the markets. The Egyptian Stock Exchange closed Thursday's session in red. The benchmark index AGX30 decreased 0.99% and closed at 13,997.4 points. The JSE2 closed lower as a rally by the brand failed to lift banking stocks. The all-share fell 0.28%, closing at 57,851.29 points. Coming up in the show tonight, East Africa's first derivatives market starts trading in Nairobi booths. Load shedding intensifies in Zimbabwe, severely affecting already struggling businesses. And brewing giant InBev seeks to raise $9.8 billion in world's largest IPO. The first derivatives market in East Africa and number 2 in Africa has started trading at the Nairobi Securities Exchange. The derivatives market will enable investors to diversify their investments, manage risk, and deploy funds more efficiently. Besides the many benefits to traders, the platform will position Kenya as a leading financial hub and therefore attract a flow of international investors. The Nairobi-based derivatives market will initially offer single stock futures and index futures. Clients will be able to trade futures on top 5 NSE-listed stocks, namely Safaricom, KCB Group, Equity Group, EABL, BAT, and futures on the NSE 25 share index. While the NSE derivatives market went live on Thursday, its official launch will be later on this month. In an effort to boost economic growth in Africa's most populous country, Nigeria is giving its banks a choice: lend more of their money or hand it over to the central bank and earn nothing on it. Nigeria's central bank has instructed commercial banks to use at least 60% of their deposits for loans by the end of September. Those that don't will have their cash reserve requirements increased, meaning they will be forced to park more money at the central bank. Nigerian banks are some of the most reluctant lenders in major emerging markets, with an average loan-to-deposit ratio below 60%. That compares with 78% across Africa, above 90% in South Africa, and about 76% here in Kenya. All right, so let's discuss this further with Gabriel Idahosa, an economist joining us live from Lagos in Nigeria. Gabriel, thank you for joining us. So Nigerian banks have earned that reputation of being some of the most reluctant lenders in major emerging markets. Why are they not lending?
Well, the primary reason for this is historical. For many years in Nigeria, a lot of the banks were lending recklessly. There was a large amount of insider lendings, and over that time, a lot of banks collapsed. So we've gone through about 3 rounds of reforms in the banking industry, and the number of banks in Nigeria have reduced from over 125 to just 21 banks, which we have now. The result is that the banks that survive all the series of reforms are now very cautious in lending. They have very strict credit risks portfolios and protocols, which generally accounts for the relatively low level of lending that we see now. On the other hand, most of our banks make a lot of income from cheap investments in treasury bills of states and federal governments. So the incentive, the commercial incentive to lend in order to report good profits is not very high. They consistently are able to deploy most of their deposits into these government bonds. Then on the other side, the fear of defaults from historical experience combines to see the poor level of lending that we have seen until last year, when the central bank began to be very concerned about this and decided that some proactive actions have to be taken to reverse the general pattern of very low lending. And that's why the central bank has started this move to get banks to improve lending. The other force that is driving improvement in this lending is competition. one or two of the banks have, in the last 1 year, rapidly increased lending to the consumer finance space, either directly or through consumer finance businesses. A lot of other banking lending at that level was introduced by this same bank and another bank. So out of our 21 banks, 2 banks sort of went ahead to open up retail and consumer lending in a very significant manner. So that now sort of drove all the other banks to start that process of opening up structured consumer finance, retail lending, and individual credit facilities to small-scale businesses and salary owners. We see that growing very quickly in the next 1 year to 2 years. But historically, we are coming out of an era of more than 15 years of very bad experience in lending. And that's really account for the picture that has been there up till this point, where we are trying to grow out of that.
All right, so that's a good point you brought out. There's that period of high non-performing loans, with banks, of course, being very cautious of credit growth. So is this ultimatum by the central bank going to work?
It is going to work because there is now a strong commercial incentive to grow lending. And even in the face of growing lending, the credit risk protocols are now very strict. The credit risk controls by the central bank and the NDIC, the National Deposit Insurance Corporation, all the risk protocols are very, very, not only strict, but also transparent. So the level of non-performing loans that any bank can report is tightly controlled, essentially on a monthly basis, and then on a quarterly formal reporting basis. So we do not expect to see any significant increase in non-performing loans. But we expect to see a lot of credit in areas where it is relatively easy to control. For example, salary loans to banks, to bank customers is rising very, very fast, but that is also easy to control by the banks. Also, lending against movable collaterals is also growing because the central bank has established a movable collateral registry. So all borrowers that have movable collaterals can borrow against those collaterals. We have also, in Nigeria, have 3 credit bureaus licensed by the CBN. So most borrowers in Nigeria now can have their credit scores taken by the banks. Also, every bank customer now have what is called a BVN, the biometric verification number, which means that the 38 million at this time of Nigerian bank customers have their data in the banking system, and all their borrowing across the banking system is easily visible to every banker. So lending is much easier from the point of view of credit control in the system. So the likelihood of non-performing loans rising is quite low, because from the banking side, there's a huge database of all bank customers. So every banker that is lending is able to see what that customer is owing to the entire banking system, or what they are owing to all the banks. And the central bank is part of that database for the bank verification numbers. So it's quite easy now to predict the level of non-performing loans, not only by the bank lending, but also by the banking system as a whole, and then by the central bank, and then the Nigerian Deposit Insurance Corporation, which is also part of that database. We do not expect to see another regime of runaway non-performing loans. All
right, some good news there. But the government is doing this in a bid to spur economic growth, which this year is expected at 2.5%. But what other options can the government explore to boost the economy's growth?
Well, all these measures to push economic growth is essentially for the monetary policy side, getting the banks to do a lot more lending. But that, of course, can only do so much in the pursuit of faster economic growth. On the fiscal side, on the fiscal policy side, the government is doing a lot by way of getting the development finance institutions to lend massively to specific sectors of the economy. There's a lot of lending to agriculture, massive lending by the Bank of Agriculture itself. Some sectors are being funded directly by the central bank. We also have the Bank of Industry and the Development Bank of Nigeria that are lending to various sectors of the economy. And we are talking of billions of dollars in lending funds. We also have the Africa Finance Corporation that is also on lending. So we have a large number of local and international financial institutions that are lending to the real sector. And we expect that to begin to show in the larger growth rates. But of course, that's against the background of a population, the Nigerian population, that is growing at about 2.5% every year. So that really explains why it's such a hard job to grow the economy beyond those kind of rates of 2-3% we are seeing. It will require a very massive effort by both the government on the fiscal policy side and the central bank on the monetary policy side. We expect that in the next 1 or 2 years, growth rate can rise to between 3 and 4%. But again, for us Nigerians, any growth rate less than 7% will not do it because we continue to grow as a people between 2 to 3%. So we are not impressed as Nigerians, even at 3 or 4% growth. It's not going to move us to where we need to be in terms of our potentials. So it's still early days in the effort to grow the economy at the pace it can grow, considering the resources, both human and material, that are available in the country. It's pretty much work in progress where we are now.
All right, Gabriel, we appreciate those insights. Thank you for joining us, Gabriel, leader host live in Lagos. Now, we remain in Nigeria, where Italian prosecutors are widening an investigation into suspected obstruction of justice by officials of oil group Eni. The move is threatening to open a new legal front for the company as it defends itself in a major corruption trial. The inquiry is preliminary and has been overshadowed by the ongoing trial, which centers on the 2011 purchase of a Nigerian oil field by Eni, an oil major shell, but it is gathering momentum. Milan prosecutors have been questioning a growing number of people, and Eni itself is under investigation over suspicions that a few company officials tried to discredit 2 key prosecution witnesses in the corruption case. Eni has said in public statements that it knew of no attempt to obstruct justice and would consider itself a victim if any crime of obstruction was shown to have been committed. Mining company Vedanta says it is seeking an urgent court order in South Africa to prevent Zambia's mining investment arm, ZCCM, from winding up its disputed Konkola copper mines business. Vedanta is locked in a dispute with the Zambian government. The government is accusing KCM of breaching the terms of its license. Vedanta denies that KCM has broken the terms of its license and says it will defend its assets in Zambia, Africa's second biggest copper producer. The case has intensified concerns among international miners about resource nationalism in Africa. Vedanta said in a statement that it had obtained a temporary order in South Africa's High Court, allowing it to make an urgent request on July 16th for an injunction against ZCCM and a provisional liquidator at KCM. The Egyptian government has announced a plan of incentives for exporters based on an export subsidy package. Exports are considered one of the main sources of hard currency for the state budget and is an integral component of the latest economic reforms. CGTN's Yasser Hakim looks at the new export incentives.
Mines Ibrahim is a marketeer and business consultant for several companies. She says businesses need government incentives for exports.
Supporting exports need the collaboration of all departments in the Trade Ministry, Exports Authority and banking system. Building the base to support exporters and remove all red tape procedures for them is essential to their success.
Egyptian exports are lower than expectations, though it had increased by 18% year-on-year. In statements issued by the Ministry of Trade ahead of the new fiscal year, it has announced a 5-year plan to increase exports from the current $24.8 billion to $55 billion by 2025. An export subsidy of around $500 million has been introduced to encourage producers to export.
وهيشرف على الدعم.
The Ministry of Trade and Industry, along with the central bank, will determine who deserves to receive subsidies on their exports. The new initiative also solves other issues that face exporters like financing and money transfer.
The government has given special emphasis on the African market. Trade with African neighbors constitutes only 1% of Egypt's trade with the rest of the world.
One of the main conditions to receive the export subsidies as a producer is that you can penetrate certain markets. The main targeted markets are the African markets and Latin America. A producer can be subsidized by up to 7 to 15% if they export to African markets.
Aside from the export subsidy, there are other incentives like zero tariffs on imported raw material intended for production and re-exporting to Africa. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
In your corporate news, South African lender Absa Bank, along with US-based Bank of America Merrill Lynch and Britain's Standard Chartered Bank, have signed a $500 million syndicated loan. The loan is the first syndicated loan in which Absa has participated in over a decade. The proceeds will be used for general corporate purposes, including trade-related finance. Soft drinks maker Coca-Cola has launched 4 new beverages targeting sports people and the health conscious as it grapples with consumers turning away from its sugary drinks. The new products include Coke Plus Coffee, Minute Maid Nutri Defenses and Powerade, a soft drink targeting sports people. They also include a sugarless portfolio of Coca-Cola, Fanta, Sprite and Stoney drinks. Naspers has made another investment in Dot, a European company that offers commuters shared electric scooters and bikes for short-distance travel. The micromobility company, which started introducing its e-scooters and e-bikes in European cities in 2019, said on Thursday it had received commitments for a $33.8 million Series A funding. And the global aviation industry has embarked on a major initiative geared towards reducing carbon dioxide emissions in its operations. The initiative, under the banner Fly Responsibly, is spearheaded by international carrier KLM. It seeks to bring together global aviation actors, airlines, partners, customers and employees to play a more active role in reducing carbon dioxide emissions. The global aviation industry contributes an estimated 2 to 3% of the man-made CO2 emissions in the world. And that's a wrap of your corporate headlines. You're watching Global Business. Still ahead. Load shedding intensifies in Zimbabwe, severely affecting already struggling businesses. And African governments are urged to utilize blockchain technologies to curb high levels of corruption.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Naidu. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Zimbabwe's power crisis is getting worse. Load shedding has intensified, with outages running up to 18 hours per day, forcing many businesses to improvise in order to survive. ACGTN's Firework with the details.
Welding rods and grinders light up the night sky like fireflies upside down to cope with the extraordinary circumstances.
And that means reporting for duty at 11 p.m., which is when power is restored here, and trying to get as much done before it's switched back off again before daybreak.
The restricted hours are hurting production.
Normally I make 3 scotch cuts per day, but in the 6 hours of power that we get, I cannot even finish one. So business is low, because there's no way clients can give you more orders when you cannot even fulfill the ones that you have.
And taking a toll physically.
I fell ill after working in the cold for 2 nights in a row. I'm still not well, but I had to come, or else my family will not eat.
There's growing frustration over the situation.
The government should make sure that we get better supply, because we prepay for electricity, so it should be available when we need it.
A drought-induced drop in generation at Karibe Hydro Power Station sparked the crisis, which worsened after Zimbabwe was cut off by regional suppliers over piling arrears. Government, which has no answer for when the crisis will end, blames defaulters who owe power utility ZESA $1.2 billion for its failure to service the debt.
I need that money to come to ZESA. And when it comes to ZESA, we want it to be applied to situations that will increase or improve our generation of power. This matter is urgent, and we are taking or applying all efforts to make sure that we normalize the situation. We all need to be working together.
Right now, there's little work going on here. Even by day, some businesses like this fast food chain open only during peak lunchtimes to avoid running a generator throughout, a survival technique more are likely to adopt, with adverse impact on the economy. Firework, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
The International Monetary Fund's Executive Board is set to debate on the long-delayed bailout for Congo Republic. Negotiations for an IMF program have been stagnant since 2017. The board is demanding the African oil producer to ensure sustainability of its debt, mostly owed to China and oil traders. The IMF is set to recommend the board approves a 3-year credit facility following Congo's restructuring of a portion of the debt owed to China. However, government advisors have warned of a possibility that the IMF board may reject the proposed bailout. African governments are being advised to embrace the use of blockchain technologies to curb high levels of corruption, check illicit financial flows, and eliminate poverty. The Sierra Leone President, Julius Maada Bio, says digital currency technologies will also help strengthen institutions and prevent the continent from losing billions of dollars. The Sierra Leone leader is attending the 2019 Africa Blockchain Conference in Uganda's capital, Kampala. CGTN's Michael Baleke has that report.
Computer technologies are driving industry in Africa, and the same innovations are now being integrated in state governance systems to drive economies. Sierra Leone's President Julius Maada Bio says this is the only way Africa can tackle poverty.
Let's involve everybody, from you guys, the young guys leading this particular revolution, to those of us who have to create the enabling environment and the legal and regulatory framework for it to function in a way that it is not going to be too disruptive.
Sierra Leone is already incorporating blockchain technologies in the electoral process and financial systems. And this is in line with the focus of the 2019 Africa Blockchain Conference to prepare Africa for the fourth industrial revolution, which is primarily the use of internet innovations to change the way people live, work, and relate to one another.
The politicians tend to look at the internet from the angle of a product, like the way you go into a shop and you buy a phone. They haven't noticed that this is now a marketplace that connects billions of consumers who don't care where the product is coming from, for as long as that product, they can feel safe with it.
Kenya and South Africa have also begun implementing tech-friendly laws. Recently, Uganda launched a national task force that will oversee and advise on the adoption of the new tech innovations. The leaders are also worried about the cost of shifting from the old technologies to the new era.
Personally, one concern that I have when we're trying to get more goods and services online, including e-government, access to health, access to education, and we have governments shutting down access to the internet, you're disrupting the lives. It's disrupting employment, it's disrupting delivery of health services. So how do we find the right balance?
As governments and the private sector explore ways to use blockchain to push value to service sectors, tech experts argue that there must be a deliberate move to change the education system to position young developers to build solutions for African problems. Michael Balekesi, GTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Mozambique's presidency has confirmed it is committed to respecting international law on debt. This comes after an $850 million Eurobond issued in 2013 by the state-run tuna fishing company Ematam was ruled illegal. The Eurobond, labeled the Tuna Bond, was set to finance a tuna fishing fleet and had been presented to investors as funding for fishing infrastructure. Most of the funds were later designated for maritime security and reallocated to the defense budget. In 2016, the government agreed to swap the bond's outstanding $697 million for a sovereign Eurobond issued under English law. Borrowing by emerging market governments is subject to English or American law, and this allows investors to enforce claims in either of the jurisdictions. China wants to increase its investment in Ethiopia as it targets to further expand its presence in Africa. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, the world's second-largest economy has so far injected over $3.4 billion into Ethiopia, making it the biggest foreign investor in the country. With the details, here's CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi.
The Eastern Industry Zone, 30 kilometers from Addis Ababa city. Of the 103 companies here, over 80 are Chinese, producing for the export market.
Until the end of 2018, the Chinese direct investment registered in the Ethiopia Investment Commission have amounted to around 110 billion birr, with a total number over 1,357 projects.
But Chinese private investors want more support from the Ethiopian government.
For the laborers, they're skillful. Really, we need to improve the skillful because, like for our park, you can see all the factory are very big one, and also the machine and everything is really very high model. We can export, but depends the skillful of the workers. That means depends of the product. If we can do the better product, we can export. Otherwise, you see.
Other investors in the country include Indonesia, Malaysia, and Saudi Arabia. According to the World Bank, a slowdown in Ethiopia's economic growth since 2016 is partly due to slow industrial growth. That has been caused by lower construction due to foreign exchange shortages and the weaker performances of manufacturing and agricultural sectors.
The government thus has initiated a private sector reform program, including improvements in the ease of doing business and liberalizing the country's investment laws and policies to ensure transparency and a wider participation of the private sector in the economy.
China has been accused of using its economic power to influence policies in its favor in Africa, but it insists its investments benefit the countries in which they are made. This year, Ethiopia and China signed a $1.8 billion investment agreement. This will cover the provision of electric power transmission and distribution lines to 16 such industrial parks, the Ethiopia-Djibouti Railway, and other cities in the country. Ethiopia has a large population that offers affordable labor and a market for manufactured goods. With the government making land available to investors and plans to liberalize some key sectors, it hopes to open up further for inflow of more foreign investment. Coletta Wanjoyi, CGTN, in Dukem, Ethiopia.
UAP Holdings has written off $5.8 million of its investment in its Tanzanian subsidiary due to the deterioration of business conditions in the market. The loss is attributed to rising claims and expenses compared to income from investment and insurance covers. This resulted in a net loss of $5 million for the parent company compared to a net profit of $5.9 million in 2018. The company's Tanzanian subsidiary suffered revenue shortfall due to the reduced spending by the government. It also lost access to its deposits in Tanzania's Bank M, which collapsed after failing to meet its short-term obligation. The firm aims to re-engage its subsidiaries' customers and intermediaries to preserve its market share. The latest release of the MSCI South Africa Annual Green Property Index points to a sector that continues to outperform inflation. It measures investment returns for 317 prime and A-grade offices and compares the returns of 96 green-certified buildings to the return of the remaining 221 non-certified constituents. Angela Coppola has more.
The index shows a higher return for green-certified office properties based on lower vacancy rates and a higher net income per square metre.
The green-certified assets do come out with a much more significant three-year total return at around about 10.2% versus the non-certified assets, which was just over 7%. And this is in a market where there's huge constraints to office lettings, in a market where tenants are hard to find. So 10% is a really good result in terms of office returns.
Another key result from the index, which has driven the returns, is that of vacancies in certified buildings.
This is driven by lower vacancies. So vacancies are very much under control in your certified buildings, whereas in the uncertified buildings they seem to be climbing with the rest of the market. And the result of that is that the valuers, when they're assessing the valuations of the green certified buildings, they are seeing a lot less risk in the income stream going forward.
If you are in the property sector and you're a property owner, you want tenants, and you want tenants that are happy and tenants that will stay. You want a guarantee that your investment will keep on bringing a return. And it has been proven that in a green building, you tend to attract tenants easily and tenants tend to stay.
Vacancies, be they in certified or non-certified buildings, remain a concern, specifically in a low-growth environment. It's worrying the Green Buildings Council, a lobby group in the built environment.
We lobby a lot and work with government. So in our advocacy program, we'll be focusing on really showing government how important it is that they put incentives on the table that would allow investors and property owners to go green, with the understanding that they will spend less on rates and taxes at the end of the day. And for government, the advantage is that you get more economic activity and you get more businesses and industries coming into a particular locality.
Investors in the green building environment are concerned about ongoing expenditure, like regular certification, and whether they will see satisfactory returns.
So that becomes a bit of a talking point, is how much capital do they need to continually employ to make sure that they are staying certified and staying on top of the greening that's out there. That, though, doesn't just talk to greening, it talks to buildings overall.
As environmental issues take centre stage and climate change and its impact on the globe are becoming critical, it's important that what happens in the built environment is also managed properly. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
You're watching Global Business. Coming up after the break. Brewing giant AB InBev seeks to raise $9.8 billion in world's largest IPO. And Beijing insists that tariffs must be removed for a trade deal to be reached with the US.
Data out of the country. The countries have foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
Peninah Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Let's have a look at the top stories of the day. Dozens are feared dead after a boat carrying more than 70 migrants capsized off the coast of Tunisia. 3 people are said to have survived, but about 80 people are still missing. According to survivors, the boat sank off the Tunisian town of Zazes. Last month, at least 65 people drowned when their boat set off from Libya and sank off the Tunisian coast. The United Nations says it has information that government guards at the detention center that was attacked on Tuesday shot at fleeing migrants and refugees. The UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs also says the death toll from the airstrike could rise since bodies are still being retrieved from the rubble of the Tajura Migrant Detention Center. In the DR Congo, security forces have expelled an estimated 2,000 illegal miners from a cobalt mine. The eviction comes 1 week after landslide at Kamoto Copper Company mine killed 43 people. The miners at the Glencore cobalt mine had defied a deadline by the army to leave. Rights groups say the expulsions fail to address the underlying issues of poverty and unemployment. And at least 2 people are said to have died after a pipeline exploded in Nigeria. This is the second incident this week following a fuel truck spillage that caught fire, claiming the lives of over 50 people. And that's a look at some of the day's top stories. Brewing giant InBev is seeking to raise up to $9.8 billion by listing its Asia-Pacific business in Hong Kong, marking what would be the world's largest initial public offering this year. Budweiser Brewing Company, APAC, whose portfolio of more than 50 beer brands includes Stella Artois and Corona, is selling 1.6 billion primary shares at between $5.13 and a little over $6 apiece. The deal will raise between $8.3 billion and $9.8 billion for heavily indebted InBev before any over-allocation option is included, giving Budweiser Asia a market capitalization of up to $63.7 billion after the IPO.
We are leading the premium growth in the markets. We are the leading brewer in Asia. We have a strong profitability base and is growing rapidly. And we also have a mix of countries which you typically don't see with any other company in Asia. Typically you have companies that are very strong in one market but not in other markets. And we are actually leading several of the markets in which we operate, and they're very sizable markets. So it is quite rare to have that mix of developed markets and developing markets with a strong portfolio and high growth.
The Chinese Ministry of Commerce has said that existing U.S. tariffs would have to be removed for there to be any trade deal between Beijing and Washington. The ministry said that trade teams from both countries are in communication. That's after the U.S. Trade Representative said Wednesday that the 2 countries are scheduling a principal-level phone call for the next week. The presidents of the 2 countries agreed last weekend to relaunch stalled trade talks. To get the negotiations restarted, U.S. President Donald Trump agreed to not implement tariffs on about $300 billion in additional Chinese imports. He also agreed to ease curbs on Chinese tech giant Huawei. The Chinese Commerce Ministry also said that China welcomes the U.S.'s move to suspend any new tariffs. Have a listen.
China thinks America's unilateral tariffs would hurt its enterprises and consumers, add uncertainty to the global economy, and even drag it into a recession. America's unilateral tariffs on Chinese goods were the starting point of our trade disputes. If both sides can reach a deal, it means all tariffs must be scrapped. China welcomes America's move of suspending new tariffs, which has prevented an escalation of tensions. We hope both sides can reach a win-win solution based on the 2 leaders' consensus and on the basis of equality and mutual respect. It will create stability for enterprises of both countries and the rest of the world, as well as a predictable environment for trade and investment.
Americans are celebrating Independence Day holiday, but this year's traditional cookouts and other activities could be more expensive because of U.S.-China trade tensions. That's because American grill manufacturers say they are struggling with higher prices for steel and Chinese-made components. Still, American consumers may find some consolation in less costly meat, as declining exports have resulted in an oversupply of meat. Another Independence Day tradition, fireworks, could also be affected by the trade tensions. Fireworks retailers are worried about the potential tariffs that could hit their products. CGTN's Dan Williams recently visited one of the retailers in the state of Ohio.
On the outskirts of Youngstown, Ohio, a group of testers for America's largest commercial fireworks retailer examine the latest products. This is an essential part of the Phantom Fireworks quality control, providing feedback to their Chinese-based manufacturers. But right now, the company's focus is on sales and the busy July 4th period.
During a 6-week period, we do about 90% of our business.
William Weimer is the vice president of the company. He, along with the rest of the firework industry, is worried about tariffs. The trade dispute between China and the US had threatened penalties of 25% imposed on fireworks imported from China. Although that tariff threat was recently avoided following a decision by the US and China to resume trade talks, concerns remain, with US retailers unable to do much about it.
The Chinese are the people who have developed fireworks. They've developed the innovations in fireworks. There's no other country that can possibly match the expertise and the experience. Not only can't we find an alternate supplier to China, we're not interested in finding an alternate supplier to China.
The US commercial fireworks market has almost doubled in size over the last decade, from 500 million in 1999 to 945 million last year.
The huge array of fireworks that are now available on the market is pretty impressive. All of these are made in China, and if a tariff is ever imposed, then the company says they'll have no choice but to pass that cost on to the consumer.
Maybe we could absorb a couple percent, but we're going to pass on at least 20% of a 25% tariff to our customers. And the customers are going to react, as you would expect, very negatively. They'll buy less, our business will go down. It would be disastrous.
Shoppers in this store appear to agree.
So if the 25% tariff came into effect, we would scale back, just not purchase as many fireworks, and just so we can be able to afford the 25% tax on it.
Cut it back 25%. You wouldn't spend $1,000, you'd spend $750.
That, Weimer says, would see job layoffs and a halt to expansion plans.
Until there's an absolute agreement between the two countries, this threat is looming over us, and it's a very insecure feeling.
The signs are promising for an explosive July 4th fireworks sales period, but concerns remain that the industry could fizzle out if the tariff threat returns. Dan Williams, CGTN, Youngstown, Ohio.
Despite sanctions from the US, some of Iran's high-tech firms are thriving. From application companies to smartphone makers, they're trying to survive US economic pressure. Our correspondent Hussein Nematzadeh has the details from Tehran.
There are more than 64 million mobile internet users in the Islamic Republic of Iran, a country of 80 million people. Smartphone ownership has skyrocketed while the country's internet penetration rate has reached over 90%. Usage of the mobile internet has risen in Iran along with the growth of social media and startups. Iranian tech entrepreneurs have learned to live with and develop under the US sanctions.
Apple and Google have removed popular Iranian apps from Apple and Google stores. Access to some American social media apps is also restricted here. But locally established Android and iOS markets have filled this void. Cafe Bazaar, an Iranian giant Android market, emerged and developed amid and due to the US sanctions.
Cafe Bazaar was launched about 8 years ago, and when Google Play stopped its services for Iranian users, a team of students and graduates of Sharif University of Technology started working on an application called Bazaar, which means market or marketplace.
Cafe Bazaar was launched in 2011. It is now the most popular app store among Iranians. It offers apps one can see in Google Play and local apps as well, making room for Iranian startups and app developers to launch their products in their homeland.
Google Play actually wasn't available in Iran. You have a lot of Iranian people looking to the international marketplace for applications and technology for their daily lives. You have a lot of developers in Iran who are trying to produce applications and games. Both groups are having trouble dealing with the international marketplace and what happens is we end up creating this bridge between those two communities and things really take off from there.
Cafe Bazaar now has 40 million users. There are over 180,000 apps available in Cafe Bazaar's platform, covering a wide range of categories. The value of the company is estimated to be at 380 million euros. Cafe Bazaar is increasingly looking toward games to drive future revenue, as Iran has an estimated 25 million gamers.
Cafe Bazaar is planning to expand its business with international game developing companies. We can help them to localize their apps and games in Iran for Iranian users.
We're going to be going to China Joy in August, which is going to be a great opportunity for us to directly engage with those game developers. So it's going to be a really good opportunity to see what we can do in terms of expanding the cooperation we already have with Chinese developers.
Talented young Iranians haven't let the US keep their country from enjoying the global trends in business and technology. The absence of US tech giants such as Amazon, Google Play, and Uber have allowed their Iranian equivalents to grow rapidly thanks to 3G and 4G technology, with 5G on the way. Hossein Nematzadeh, CGTN, Tehran.
In the gold markets, analysts are forecasting a rise in prices that could reach a 6-year high due to a host of positive drivers. In 2019, gold prices have rallied 11% due to concerns on slowing global growth and China-US trade tensions. Prices continued to rise after US President Donald Trump said that he intended to nominate 2 dovish candidates to the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors. A number of macro factors are considered at play, including a weaker dollar, that are causing investors to turn to gold as a safe haven asset. The nomination of IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde to lead the European Central Bank is also expected to create an even more bullish environment for gold. Well, leaders aim to reduce food waste by 2030 under the Sustainable Development Goals set by the United Nations in 2015. Wastage is estimated at a third of food produced globally and is worth $1 trillion. However, a PhD student has devised a way to lower the wastage and achieve safe consumption of food. ACGTN's Laura Walubengo with the details.
Technology is advancing with time and the world is set to benefit. This includes the production sector. Consumption of food has been relatively dependent on proper packaging. Scientists have now developed paper-based electrical gas sensors to ensure food is safe to consume.
The beauty of it, obviously, is the simplicity. We use paper, everyday paper, and just print an ink on it, and then we can measure gases.
The pegs contain near-field communication and are made by printing carbon electrodes into cellulose paper. This provides data that is readable on smartphones, detecting spoilage gases like ammonia and trimethylamine.
Nowadays, even we try to reduce plastic packaging. Every meat, especially meat, high-quality meat, chicken, fish, is still coming in a plastic package. And if we can reduce the amount of meat, fish, chicken that's thrown away, we can actually reduce the packaging as well. So we in total reduce not only the food waste, but also the plastic waste, which goes hand in hand with food waste nowadays, unfortunately.
1 in 3 UK consumers throws away food solely due to the set expiry date. 60% of the food is still pegged safe to eat. The PEGS technology is not only considered an answer to food wastage, but to packaging waste as well.
Obviously, when I started the PhD, I saw the idea was great, but I would never have thought of that we would go this far. But now that everything works, it actually looks like there's going to be a great impact. And we can bring it from the lab, where it works really well, to the industry and have retailers and customers use our technology.
Globally, a third of all food produced, estimated at $1 trillion, is wasted. The United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization indicates annual food waste could rise by a third to 2.1 billion tons by 2030. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
All right, looking at the commodities market, gold prices inched up today, supported by a decline in U.S. Treasury yields amid prospects of an interest rate cut by the Federal Reserve. While investors sought direction from upcoming U.S. non-farm payrolls data, oil prices, on the other hand, fell, weighed down by data showing a smaller than expected draw on U.S. crude stockpiles and worries about the global economy. You're watching Global Business, still ahead. A boon for peanut farmers in Senegal following a growing demand in China.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Two pretty Nigerian kids have both made robots that can fold clothes and grab nearby objects. They both want to pursue a future in robotics to help people solve theirs and their country's everyday problems. CGTN's Alexandria Majala has the details.
If you hate folding clothes, then this young Nigerian innovator has an answer for you. A robot that can fold laundry. Dubbed the Robot T-shirt, this time-saving innovation was created by 12-year-old Fatiat Abdullahi. Abdullahi wanted to create something that would make daily tasks a little easier, after seeing how time-consuming it was for her family.
This is the T-shirt folder. I made it because there are too much clothes to fold on Saturdays and Sunday when you wash a lot. I made it using some pins, some beans, and an EV3 brick.
The robot can fold a T-shirt in 3 seconds. At the moment, the robot is a prototype, but Abdullahi hopes to start developing more for the local market. And she has ambitions to achieve more.
The programming language that interests me is the EV3 programming language, and my next project is going to be the bracelets maker.
Oluwatomiloba Owolowa also codes and builds robots and has just unveiled his latest innovation, a robot grabber, which senses nearby objects and is able to lift them up.
I am a programmer and I build robots. For example, the Robo Grabber. I want to grow up to be a robotic engineer. My parents have agreed on this, my career choice. They agreed on this because they saw how I loved coding and building robots, and they saw my passion.
Abdullahi and Owolowa started learning how to code 2 years ago at the Niger Code Kids, a coding center in southern Nigeria founded by Ugochukwu Nkocha. Nkocha was inspired to create the center after returning from the UK and wanted to equip Nigerian children with basic tech knowledge like what he had seen in the United Kingdom. He has been running coding programs for 3 years and has taught about 1,500 kids so far.
First, before we put this in, the next phase will be to move from the prototypes into real products now that can be sold in the market for people to buy and use in their homes or to solve their own problems. So that's the next step.
Analysts say technological innovation is a quick way to attain lasting economic growth and development and should be exploited further to help Nigeria diversify away from oil. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Now let's turn to Shanghai, where residents are legally obliged to sort their garbage. The policy only came into place on Monday, so there's still a lot of confusion about what goes where. But as usual, there are many entrepreneurs who thrive in this kind of chaos. Take a look.
A big test facing residents of China's biggest city.
I had a lot of trouble at the beginning.
Shanghai is going green, but it looks like authorities are going to need to exercise patience. While there's a strong desire among residents for more environmentally friendly practices, understanding simple directions is a different matter. It all sounded so great in theory, but less so in practice.
I was a little confused at first. I thought all the kitchen waste was wet garbage, but I was wrong.
The uncertain environment has, of course, presented business opportunities. Fed-up residents can simply order a recycling servant online.
We recycle cartons, plastic bottles, and tin cans, among others.
They know all there is to know about sorting, separating, and classification.
We have clients from office buildings and residential communities.
According to analysis, China's urban residents produce 270,000 tons of wet garbage every day. So far, China has invested in facilities that can handle more than twice this amount. The new dynamic is expected to create a market worth about 140 billion yuan. Meanwhile, there's already a supply problem in many stores, as residents look to stock up on rubbish bins.
I was gonna buy a garbage can yesterday. I planned to buy a medium-sized one for family use, but they are already out of sales.
And smart dumpsters like these have definitely caught the attention of high-tech companies. Several days have passed, but their efforts didn't all go smoothly. The dumpsters are only available during specific periods of the day, which some people find inconvenient, while authorities and volunteers are trying to reach those with limited access to the information.
We need to work day and night and even on holidays to make sure every household knows that we've launched this measure.
But not to worry. Experts say we're only at the beginning, and with advancements such as the application of the internet and garbage disposal technology, things will only get easier, and the classification know-how may soon be available in our pockets. Rory Cohn, CGTN.
And looking at the currency, South Africa's rand rose against the dollar today to hit its strongest in nearly 3 months, tracking fellow emerging market currencies as the dollar was dented by hopes of US interest rate cuts. The Kenyan shilling strengthened against the dollar due to banks unwinding their long dollar positions amid reduced dollar demand from oil and merchandise importers. And with that, we come to the end of Global Business today. We invite your feedback, send it to the contacts on the screen and follow us on our digital media platform. I'm Peninah Karibe. Thank you for watching.